My name is Regine Spector. I'm from UMass Amherst, and I've been working in this space with Fix the Grid for the last couple of years. What we're going to do is more of a roundtable. So we'll start with Sudi. If you could just first introduce yourself and your organization.
All right, I'm Sudi. I'm from Peabody, Mass, where we got a surprise third peaker plant in our community, and that's what galvanized me. And I'm affiliated with the group that came to address the peaker, and that's Breathe Clean North Shore. And also I'm with MCAN, Mass Climate Action Network, and Fix the Grid.
Hi everyone, my name is Nathan Phillips. I live in Newton, Massachusetts, about 10 miles west of Boston, and I'm a member of the what's called the Consumer Liaison Group of the ISO New England Regional Grid, elected to that position along with Regine for the last year and a half. I do research and I teach at Boston University in ecology and environmental science. And I got into the grid through the gas utilities because I've been studying all of the issues with gas utilities, gas leaks, and learned about the gas electricity connection. They're deeply connected from below our streets and sidewalks all the way up to the level of the New England regional grid. So I bring that kind of perspective to this topic.
Morning, everyone. I guess it's still morning. My name is John Walkey. I'm the Director of Climate Justice at GreenRoots. We're an environmental justice nonprofit based in Chelsea and working in the city of Chelsea in the neighborhood of East Boston. And I fell backwards into the energy space when I found out about an electrical substation being proposed in my neighborhood by Eversource that was going in a flood zone. And I was wondering who was making this decision, and we started fighting this, and I got into the whole regulatory process at the state level of how this stuff gets done, which led, all roads seem to lead towards ISO New England, because that was where people passed the buck to, that we need this because ISO New England says we need it. And then as I started looking into it more and more, I thought, wow, we're really getting screwed. So that's how I got into this.
Thank you all. So we're going to start our first round with John, who's going to tell us a little bit about what energy democracy is and how he came to this concept. And then we'll get a little bit more into each of these cases that everyone mentioned.
I'll try to be fast here. This cartoon up here, this is actually a second version by the same artist. He did one back in 1978, which was pretty much the same thing. And for the benefit of Spanish speakers and for the benefit of our translator, while everyone else reads it in English, I'll just do it in Spanish. So, hay un pequeño perrito y un hombre de una corporación que es de las compañías de petróleo. Y el perrito dice que, Señor Petro, ¿puede resolver nuestra crisis de energía? Y él dice que sí, tú quieres carbón, somos dueños de las minas. Tú quieres petróleo y gas, somos dueños de los pozos. Tú quieres energía nuclear, somos dueños de uranio. Tú quieres la energía solar o el viento, somos dueños de... en este momento es solar y viento no es factible en este momento. And so the idea that the corporations have their arms around the production, and they are dribbling out what they want to us, and we have to pay for it. When it comes to wind and solar, there's this great opportunity. It's freely available to everyone. So you could set up a panel on your house. You can set up a wind turbine on your farm and get this energy. The question is how much, and going all the way back to 1978, that was around the time that Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the roof of the White House, and everyone laughed at him, and Ronald Reagan got in there and he ripped them out, and it was drill baby drill ever since. So the technology has been there for us to make this transition to clean energy. And in all of these spaces where many of you have all gathered on an environmental movement, we've been trying to clean things up. We've been trying to be more sustainable. At the same time, energy democracy for many people who live in communities of color have not been an issue of like saving us for this future crisis that we're going to have. For people who live in Houston and Cancer Alley near the refineries, the oil refineries down there, cleaning up our energy system is a matter of life and death today for them, not a future climate change scenario. Of course, that future climate change scenario is now today, so we're all on the line. But simply decarbonizing the current system is not energy democracy. In the same way as like preserving a big conservation area is not environmental justice. You have to look at the people who are being most affected by the systems that we have in place and how do we change those systems. Just one other slide, I swear, only one. And what you see on the left-hand side is just how the grid has operated. And as in the previous session we mentioned, it's sort of a centralized system. We've deregulated it a little bit, so you've got producers on one side, you've got transmission and distribution companies in the middle, dribbling it out to us, and it's all sort of in a one-way direction towards people down here who are consumers. You want consumer choice, and it's all about being a good consumer. On the right-hand side, what we're seeing is the technology is there now for us to have more distributed generation, for us to have more clean generation. It implies that the grid is going to be different because you're not just sitting there taking in energy, but you could have solar panels that are putting energy back in. So keeping that grid in balance is sort of like a tug of war. You got to keep the rope taut. So ISO is going to be asked to manage the balancing that's going to get more and more complex. And that's going to require more investment in that distribution system. Well, that investment is going to be directly in your monthly bill. And right now, 100% of it we're paying for. It's ridiculous. And so what we want to see at the bottom here is not that people are good consumers just going and paying your bill and paying whatever crap they throw at you, but we want people who are getting at the table and saying, damn it, I'm not going to pay this. I'm going to be here to make decisions about what I'm going to pay for. This doesn't make any sense that I would pay for this. The crazy part right now is, think of it this way. I knock on your door and say, I've got this great deal for you. Give me some money, and I'm going to buy this property, and I'm going to build a house, and then you can move into the house. But I own the deed. Oh, and you're going to pay me rent. And if a branch comes through the roof, you're going to pay to fix the roof. And I get a 10% profit on everything. You would say, that doesn't make any sense. If I'm going to pay you for this asset, this capital asset, this house, I'm going to own it, you know. I'm going to buy it from you and live in it, and I'll pay you to maintain it, yeah. But the way we have our grid set up, we pay for all these capital assets, and they own it. And then they charge us to use it. That's not how our transportation infrastructure works. We pay taxes, and we paid for a highway system, and people get on, and they just start driving. Well, I mean, that's the way we have to start thinking about the grid and getting around it so that people can participate in this. And I think Sudi can speak to what happens when you don't participate, because one of the things we do have, at least in Massachusetts, are our municipal light plants, where in theory we've got 41 of them, and the last one was formed, well actually, bless you, the last light plant was formed in 1926, and we haven't had any since until Fort Devens became a town, and then Devon in 96 or 97 became a light plant as well, where your municipality runs the electrical system. And there you can vote the buggers out if you don't like them. But for the rest of us, I can't vote the CEO of Eversource out of his office. I just have to take whatever he gives me. And energy democracy is about getting all of us more engaged in this process so we understand it, which is a very, very New England thing to do, to go to town meeting and give your elected officials hell. And we should be able to do that, all of us, for our electrical bills as well.
Thank you, John. Do either of you want to add anything to this concept of energy democracy, or we should probably move on in the interest of time? I think I'll pass it to you, Sudi, to talk a little bit more about municipal ownership. As Sudi mentioned, there was a peaker plant, which is basically a fossil fuel-based generation plant that's only used when the grid needs more electricity. A third one was built in the community, and the community is also governed by a municipal light plant, an MLP, as John mentioned. And those are technically a little bit different from other communities that don't have them. They should be more accountable to public and to citizens in that area. And Sudi, it would be great if you could talk a little bit more about the problems you faced with your MLP and what you learned from that.
I'll do that. I'll put on my outdoor voice, so let me know if you can't hear me. Well, municipal ownership only gets you so far if there is no transparency, and that's what we encountered. And that transparency surprised everyone, including city and state officials, the lack of transparency. And there was a lack of transparency around the plans to build this plant. And then there's the reality that just because the public owns PMLP, the Peabody Municipal Light Plant, doesn't mean that they are compelled to engage and inform the community. That is why Breathe Clean North Shore continues to serve as a watchdog of the public facility. We have attended every Peabody Municipal Light Commission regular meeting since 2021. The PMLC has reworked the guidelines for public participation at their meetings, making it more difficult for citizens to ask questions. Until our participation, the PMLC, which is the Peabody Municipal Light Commission, a board of 5 old white men until last year. And anyway, that's the commission. And their meetings were recorded only by hand. So now we work with the local cable television station to provide video coverage of their meetings. When we picked up a derogatory off-mic remark, the commission would not allow us to use their microphones for future recording. And we work around that ruling now. Till today, though, they pointedly don't turn on their microphones. The commission does not share its budget publicly. BCNS has received a paper copy of the budget only upon request and after it has been passed. Since we became involved, they now release meeting minutes of regular and executive sessions. When the new peaker was revealed, PMLP meetings were not available, the minutes, to the public. And executive session meeting minutes had not been released since 2015. They are almost up to date now. We have pursued open meeting law violations with the Attorney General. Our challenge regarding the posting of meeting information was found in our favor. We have another challenge under consideration regarding missing information from released minutes. We have pressured the PMLC and MWIC, the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company, to provide information on whether the new peaker, Special Project 2015A, which if you didn't know that was the name of it, you could not find information about it. But when that was passed, the DEP air and noise testing was conducted and identified the nearest residences affected. The problem is, the area of the Waters River Station where these 3 peakers exist was zoned industrial when the testing occurred. The zoning has been changed to mixed use, including residences. There are currently 2 multifamily home developments planned in closer proximity to the station than those residences previously tested. If the plant is not yet running and the stack tests have not happened, Will the DEP re-measure air quality and noise where the new housing is planned? These are the kinds of questions we have to raise because Peabody does not have a green voice. We have taken 15 years to get very close to being a green community and able to access those state programs, but we're not there yet. We don't have a sustainability director. We use the MAPC for our net zero plan, which does not involve us very much in the process. That you have to make your own voice, and sometimes, I'm sorry, you have to ruffle feathers.
Thank you. I want to dovetail off of the previous comments and talk about an experiment in energy democracy, an experiment in electricity democracy. And I want to just pivot off of Sudi's comment about this peaker plant. This peaker plant is about peak demand, fulfilling peak demand on the grid. And the power that energy democracy has to alleviate and meet those peak demand periods. A peaker is a dirty power plant that turns on when the combination of environmental conditions, the sun, the wind, the temperature, and also the human activity, the social activity, and our demand conspire together to say, there's a lot of demand and not so much supply. So dirty peaker plant has to turn on. Energy democracy can allow any one of us in this room that uses electricity to avoid those peaks to the extent that we can do it in an inclusive way, in a way that doesn't leave anyone behind, whether you rent, whether you own a home. Everyone can help each other out. We can help our most vulnerable out with energy security and resilience by coming together and seeing, because we have the information, we can see 24 hours ahead. We can see 36 hours ahead. We can see it coming. We have the power to collectively decide we're going to shift. We're going to shift when we turn on that dishwasher. We're going to shift when we charge that electric vehicle. We're going to push it out an hour or two before or after, and we can avoid those peaks, and we can shut down those peaker plants. The power of energy democracy is large. I'll give you one example. On December 24th, 2022, the ISO New England grid was at a red alert. They have a map every 5 minutes of the electricity price, and they have a color map. It was all red, from Maine to Rhode Island, red. Prices on the grid were spiking at 100 times or more the normal price of electricity. If every one of the 6 million rate-paying electricity customers in New England did the equivalent of turning down a microwave oven from full to medium in that peak hour, we would have covered the complete emergency on the grid. We have the power to do that. We have the power to do that in an inclusive way that if someone is on an oxygen machine and they need that electricity, we can help each other so that we protect each other. We have each other's back. So this pilot program, anyone here, I have some information. It's called Community Conservation. It's about building community together, and it's about conserving at the right time, at a strategic time, so we can shut down those peaker plants. And you can see me later. This is a pilot program that is involves a number of groups, including the No Coal, No Gas campaign, which I organize with. Wonderful work with Fix the Grid campaign. The technical committee, Regine, facilitates that, and some of the conversations there have been amazing in allowing and enabling us to put together the pieces of this pilot program, including how to read our meter itself. We need to educate ourselves and help each other to actually, where is the electric meter? What is it reading? How can we understand this? And so that's part of our work together. So come and see me afterwards if you want to know more about this pilot project.
Thank you, Nathan. We will have time for questions at the end. I just want to have John introduce his project first, and then we'll move on to some questions. John, tell us a little bit about microgrids.
Sure, I can tell you a little bit about a project we have going on in Chelsea, and my colleague Sari Kayali, who's in the back here, can tell you even more details because he's the guy managing it. But we are working through the Green Justice Coalition and a group called Resilient Urban Neighborhoods, which includes Climbable and a couple of other companies and nonprofits that do work in the clean energy space. And we're working in Chinatown and in Chelsea with two approaches to a microgrid. And as you may guess from the name, a microgrid is just like the grid, but small. So we're talking about a smaller geographic area of distribution being connected. And where the concept of a microgrid really has come into its own was after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, when the grid got completely wiped out and they couldn't get it back up and running again. The idea of a microgrid is that you've got a network of infrastructure so that if there's a blow to one part of the network, these smaller microgrids can, what they call, island off. They'll be their own little island of generation and distribution so that they will be able to keep going during an emergency. And so what that means, like from a physical sense, when you think of it, okay, so we're going to have our own wires and things connecting us all together. Like in Chelsea, we're talking about putting City Hall, the police department, the DPW yard, that they'll have solar panels on the city yard for the DPW, and there'll be battery storage, and then we'll be connected by wires, and we'll just do that, right? That's how it works. That's what they're planning, and actually a retired football player did this in Florida. He had a housing development, and he made a microgrid. So one of these hurricanes went through, and his little development had power going. The problem is the franchise rights that Eversource and National Grid have say that nobody else can use the public right-of-way to put in electrical cables. It's ours and ours alone. It's a monopoly. So they have the right to run the cables. Nobody else can. The only place you can really do it is if, like, you're a university or maybe a hospital that has a huge campus, and you can run the wires between your buildings on, like, the UMass campus or something like that. And so you can make a microgrid there because you own everything in it. But for a city, you can't do it. So what we're doing is something that we've been calling it a virtual microgrid. A lot of people talk about virtual power plants, where the idea is that city assets will have battery storage and solar panels, and it's basically an accounting thing where you keep track of how much energy you're able to put in, and exactly as Nathan has just described, you can say to ISO New England, listen, when those peaks are coming up, you can count on us to provide X amount of capacity because we're going to disconnect from the grid, or we're just going to live off our battery on that really hot day in July when everyone's putting their AC on. You don't have to worry about City Hall or the police station having to pull electricity because we're going to work off our batteries. So that is one way that these things can work. And the exciting thing is it's actually a way that you could participate in what they call the forward capacity market. We were talking about how ISO New England's responsible. Slow down a little bit. ISO New England is responsible for, like, paying for who's going to provide us with supply. Well, you could also participate and say, I will not necessarily provide supply, but I can provide reduced demand. And so I can participate in this market. So the city of Chelsea, using their assets, could potentially have a revenue stream that could then go back to the citizens of Chelsea and the residents of Chelsea. So this is a way that we can start taking ownership back of this from the investor-owned utilities. And Sari didn't make any faces at me, so I'm assuming I didn't get anything too wrong. Okay.
Thank you. I think we'll just have one brief round of one more question, and then we'll open it up to questions from all of you. So you've kind of already hinted at this, but it would be great if you could all just talk briefly maybe about one challenge you're confronting as you try to realize this vision. So Sudi, you've talked about the challenges of transparency that you're continuing to push for. Maybe if you have any final thoughts on that. For Nathan, any challenges you're facing in the rollout of this community conservation project, for example, with utilities or with the ISO? And John, same, you already just mentioned the challenges you're facing with the utilities, but anything more that you can maybe add to what we can do or how you're trying to overcome those challenges?
Thank you. I'm here primarily to talk about the real need for transparency being a key concept of public administration that is relevant for democracy and efficiency. In the aftermath of the Stop Peabody Peaker campaign, and Nathan, in your workshop earlier, you mentioned this, the state has undertaken updates to the energy siting process, and they've started to take note of environmental justice communities. And that's one thing we didn't talk about so much. But in a future grid, I believe they have to have a strong voice in planning and information sharing. And I believe that we have to continue to push for transparency. Otherwise, how will we learn about MWIC's plans to burn hydrogen gas blend in the new peaker? Or about their plans to handle our stranded resources? Or about the cumulative effects of pollution? So I hope that we will be able to build on relationships in Peabody. We banded with the Board of Health and wrote a grant to the Department of Public Utilities and got 7 air quality purple air monitors installed around the city that gives you live, real-time measurement. And if you want more information about that or anything that BCNS is trying to do, because even though the plant is built, it's not running. We don't know why it's not running. We don't know why or if we've been fined because it's not running by ISO New England. So there's still lots of questions to be pursued, and I'll be over there at the table. Hope you'll stop by.
So 2 challenges that come to the top of my mind when thinking about our community conservation pilot program are the ISO New England has countless rules to exclude. Rules to exclude. I know a few of them, but I've seen enough that there's probably many, many more rules to maintain incumbent powers and try to keep out insurgents from coming in. So it turns out that a collection of us and others who would together form an aggregation and team up and strategically reduce our demand at a certain time, that's worth a lot of money. In fact, a lot of companies are making a lot of money off of your meters and programs that could have the power to shut down peaker plants. But then there are these rules. Rules like one is called the minimum offer price rule. It's a rule that ISO New England brought in to keep out things like this community conservation, to keep out a project, a battery storage project that would have done everything that the Peabody peaker plant could do. They had to introduce a rule to keep the clean energy out because it was too affordable. Too affordable. They said it's not just and what's reasonable. It's not just and reasonable to the fossil fuel plants because it will be too affordable. the least costly way to address our problems on the grid is to reduce our peaks. Right now, the ISO New England says that by, I think it's 2040, the peak demand for electricity on our grid will more than double, because right now we're at 26 gigawatts. That's a big number. They say it's going to be 57 gigawatts of demand, but that assumes you charge your electric vehicle anytime you want. You turn on the light anytime you want, 24/7, 365 days a year. They see a grid like the Walmart parking lot is built out for Black Friday shopping. Massive overbuild just to be able to cover the biggest peak that could ever be. But we have the power to actually make it that we don't have those peaks. And so those rules to exclude, that's a big challenge. The other challenge, which I'm excited about, how we can meet that challenge and find out those rules and make those rules go away so that we can do this. The other big challenge is one that the president and CEO, I guess, of the ISO New England, Gordon Van Welle, put out there very clearly and said, I don't think that ratepayers, consumers, care to do this. And that is our challenge, is do we care enough together to organize together to do this together? And I really believe that by building our community in a way that corporations can't, they have transactive communities. We can build a community of care that has a lot of power on the grid.
That's a tough act to follow. Geez. I think the challenge really is the same challenge that started out when I got into this, was just so much of this is very complicated in terms of the alphabet soup, and we've tried to work our way through that. We've got the alphabet soup on the back of your agenda. The other challenge is that you're entering into a space as a resident, and you're not an electrical engineer. And when we went to the Energy Facility Siting Board in Massachusetts to fight against this substation, the challenges we faced, we brought in a table full, we brought in about 20 Spanish-speaking people, and they didn't provide any interpretation. What we have seen now is that they are providing interpretation. What we're seeing now is that there are changes starting to happen, but it's still, even if you get it interpreted into your language, it then needs to come down to a language that, even in English, that regular people can understand. Because when you get to that boardroom and that courtroom thing where they're an adjudicatory process, where they're figuring out whether or not they're going to cite this infrastructure, and you say, is this really needed? And then the lawyer who's for Eversource, who's good buddies with the people on the board, and they've been chatting beforehand, now he's up there explaining all these things, and you don't understand what they're saying, and you're trying to refute it, and you say, well, I need the data. So you go to ISO New England's website to get the data, and it's all redacted. And you're blocked from getting it because it's like security. And there's too much, and some of it you can't get the data because Eversource and National Grid has it, and it's business proprietary. And you realize that there are all these things that are locking you out. And that has been the real challenge, to be able to have the knowledge and to have the data, to be able to take your knowledge and use the data to make your case. You know, if you don't have that, you can't make your case. So that has been a challenge. I'm currently serving on the governor's, all right, let me get this right, Commission on Energy Infrastructure, Siting, and Permitting. And so this is a group of all these people that they brought together, and they actually have, to the credit of the governor, have a few different EJ representatives. And there's Rusty as one. They are one of our representatives on there. And We are there in a room full of people, again, attorneys who've been doing this for years. Everybody knows everybody else, and we're sitting there like, you feel like you've walked into somebody else's dinner party, and you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing here. But you have to eventually raise your hand and just call things out with a bunch of like the Undersecretary of Energy and this person and that person to be able to really represent what people are feeling. And people like Noeme, who just, I think, is taking care of her kid right now in the back, and other members have provided testimony on things like third-party energy suppliers and stuff like that, where people are bringing their stories forward. And I think we need more and more people within the context of like community conservation to bring their stories forward. And the last thing I'll say is that in the interest of modernizing that grid and realizing all this new technology, Eversource and National Grid submitted grid modernization plans. One was 500 pages, the other one was 700 pages. Trying to just read it, even if you were an engineer, reading it would just be god-awful. But for a regular person reading it, not that engineers aren't regular people, but you know, but a regular person reading it, it's horrific. And you're supposed to give, you know, some sensible testimony. But the reality is these companies are saying, we're going to need billions of dollars of investment. And when they say that, they're saying, you ratepayers, are going to have to pay billions of dollars so that we can own this asset. That is asinine. We need to really push back now because we need these investments, but they can't be investments that we don't own because that makes no sense.
All right. Thank you all for those inspirational stories and for sharing them and sharing your wisdom.